Good morning. I call this meeting of the Standing Senate Committee on Banking, Trade, and Commerce to order. Today, the committee is holding its sixth meeting as part of its study on the use of digital currency. The committee has heard so far from the Department of Finance, an economic historian, a professor at the Rotman School of Management, the Bank of Canada, an expert in the area of cryptography, the Bitcoin Strategy Group, and from CA Vertex, Canada's largest Bitcoin exchange. During the first hour of this meeting, we will receive a presentation from the Canadian Bankers Association and the Royal Bank of Canada. These presentations will educate the committee about payment systems currently used by financial institutions, including mobile and digital products, allowing members to compare these systems and products to the digital currencies such as Bitcoin. Representing the Canadian Bankers is Mr. Darren Hanna, Acting Vice President of Policy and Operations, and from the Royal Bank of Canada, we have Carolyn Burke, Vice President, International Cards and Canadian Regulatory Payments, and Jeremy Bornstein, Head of Emerging Payments. Welcome to the committee. Thank you for being here today. I will turn the floor first to the Canadian Bankers Association, to be followed by the Royal Bank of Canada. Mr. Hanna, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm pleased to be here today representing the Canadian Bankers Association and our 59 members, which includes domestic banks, foreign bank subsidiaries, and foreign bank branches operating in Canada. The CBA values the opportunity to contribute to public policy discussions on important issues affecting Canadians and to assist the committee in its study of digital currency in Canada. The CBA was invited here today by the committee to share our knowledge of recent developments in the area of digital currency and trends in electronic payments. We've been listening with great interest to the hearings held to date, and the committee has heard extensively from various witnesses on the basics of digital currency. At the outset, I should note that banks in Canada have not formally endorsed any forms of digital currency, though this is obviously an area that the CBA and banks are monitoring closely to see how they are evolving given the central role of banks in the payment system. Ultimately, we want to ensure that consumers and their funds are well protected and that any transaction is safe and secure. This is very important to Canadians. In fact, our public opinion research has found that 76% of Canadians trust banks to protect their personal information and transactions. We need to maintain confidence among Canadians across the payment system. It's through that lens that I'll focus my remarks and offer a banking industry perspective on innovation in digital payments and how the stability and enormous benefits of the current payment system may provide some perspectives for the committee to consider as it continues its study on the issue of digital currency. Banks are strongly supportive of creating new ways for consumers and merchants to engage in e-commerce and participate in transactions that are efficient, safe, and secure. In fact, banks are often at the forefront of new payment technologies. Since 2010, for example, banks have been involved in rolling out NFC technology to facilitate contactless credit card and debit card transactions at point of sale. This same technology can enable payments using mobile wallets, letting consumers store credit card and banking information on their smartphone device and pay for purchases with a tap of the device. With recent data showing that more than half of Canadians own a smartphone, mobile wallets and mobile payments present an opportunity for Canadians to have access to additional payment choices that are efficient, safe, and secure. To facilitate the adoption of mobile payments in Canada for the benefit of consumers and businesses, Canadian banks and credit unions have worked together to develop the Canadian NFC Mobile Reference Model, which is an agreed-upon set of principles for mobile payments. And several mobile wallets have been launched by banks using this model. The model is built around a focus around security and the use of existing technologies, such as contactless payment terminals. This will provide merchants with a seamless opportunity to take advantage of these technologies by using systems that are already in place for debit and credit card acceptance. The payments ecosystem involves the coordination of many parties to function effectively. It's our objective that providing early clarity on the design of systems that enable mobile payments will help build efficiencies into the future deployment of those systems in Canada. Furthermore, customers are benefiting from mobile payments experience by doing it safely and securely. While innovation in the payment system should be encouraged, it will only take place if sufficient safeguards it will only take place with sufficient safeguards to ensure the safety of consumers and the stability of the current payment system. When a consumer deposits money in a bank, the funds are held in a regulated financial institution, and the consumer benefits from the rights, privileges, and protections associated with dealing with a reputable, regulated institution. This includes depositor protection, clear disclosure for consumer rights and responsibilities, compensation for loss in the event of fraud, and a trusted dispute settlement mechanism. Banks also perform the role of a trusted third party when payments are made using a bank account or a bank-issued credit card, verifying that the availability of funds and guaranteeing the safety and security of those transactions. In contrast, there are risks of using digital currency that we must be mindful of. First, consumers are subject to all of the risks that go along with changing one currency for some other currency or some other mechanism, such as exchange risk and liquidity risk. Second, there's a risk that the service provider they've selected to hold their virtual currency will lack the resiliency to remain solvent or lack sufficient security standards to protect the digital currency held in trust. The losses experienced by consumers recently in high-profile Bitcoin exchange failures demonstrate the risk to consumers of dealing with payment services and payment systems that do not offer these protections to their customers. As this committee knows, rapid growth and innovation in digital payments has resulted in a much more fractured payment system, with new entrants and competitors offering novel payment solutions that are attractive to consumers. As I've just noted, the emergence of unregulated entities presents a variety of risks to Canadian consumers and to the security of the payment system, particularly in the context of consumer protection, consumer disclosure, data protection, and system stability. The banking industry has undertaken some analysis of these issues with a view to understanding their impacts on what is needed to address them, thereby encouraging debate and discussion. As a result, we've come to the view that there's a strong case to be made for implementing regulatory measures for the shadow payment system that would achieve three main objectives. One, that consumers are properly informed about the payment service being offered. Two, that the payment services providers are held to prudential and operational standards and thresholds to minimize the likelihood of a service provider causing harm to consumers or to others in the payment system. Three, that consumers have access to some form of recourse should there be a failure to deliver on the payment service as agreed. The banking industry is proud to be an integral part of the evolution of Canada's strong payment system. Banks support an open, competitive, and innovative digital payment system that promotes consumer confidence and focuses on the safety and soundness of the broader payment system. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hanna. Ms. Burke.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Carolyn Burke.
Good afternoon. My name is Carolyn Burke, and I thank you for inviting RBC to speak with you today.
Speak and present today. We are committed to providing both consumers and merchants with easy and secure payment options. We have a proud history of innovation in payments and strongly support Canada's leadership position as an electronic economy. Canadians are well served by current payment options, and we have not seen a demand for digital currency to date, although we have seen an abundance of news headlines. RBC continually monitors both emerging client needs and technology developments. Today, we are pleased to speak with you about our emerging commerce strategy and activities. Thank you for having us. We plan to address how our digital solution meets consumer and merchant needs for choice, security, and low-cost payments. The goals of RBC's digital payment solution are to make commerce easier, safer, and more rewarding for consumers and merchants. RBC has always stood for providing clients with choice in how they bank, and choice in how they pay. We deliberately waited to bring mobile commerce to market until we were able to offer both Interac debit and credit as payment options. Our commitment to merchants is that mobile commerce will not increase transactional costs. We will deliver the payment at the lowest cost based on how the client chooses to pay, by Interac debit, credit, or store gift card. We are actively working with a cross-section of merchants and consumers to understand their needs and deliver an easy, safe, and rewarding mobile commerce experience, which by design is not very different from how your plastic card works today. We are giving consumers the same choice in how they pay today with plastic: Interac debit, credit, or store gift card. Live receipts and online and mobile banking available with the mobile solution can be much easier to access and store than the paper receipts we all receive today. My colleague Jeremy Bornstein will speak to you now about the technology itself and how the security built into it is present, as mobile payment security is our client's primary concern and our top priority. Jeremy?
Thank you, Carolyn, and good morning. My name is Jeremy Bornstein, and I'm responsible for driving RBC's emerging payment strategy and solutions. RBC has always strived to deliver our clients choice, convenience, and security. The model for mobile payments that was being implemented globally was not good enough for us. We developed a patent-pending process and technology called RBC Secure Cloud to ensure clients could choose between debit, credit, or gift card. And instead of putting that sensitive information on the phone, we store that client data behind our firewall, where we can protect it on our servers in Stratford and Guelph, Ontario. Forbes magazine recently published an article on the top influencers of mobile commerce. RBC, among only a small handful of banks, was recognized as shaping the industry along with Apple, Google, and PayPal. RBC Secure Cloud is the first mobile payment service of its kind, and we are very proud of it. We began our mobile commerce journey over 4 years ago with industry solutions, but then, as RBC consistently has done to maintain our market-leading fraud prevention and client experience, created a proprietary solution to provide a higher level of choice, convenience, and security. Slide 3 of the presentation that was handed out earlier is a simplified representation of our solution. On the left-hand side of that page are the client payment credentials. We leave these credentials, as mentioned, securely behind our firewall. Importantly, by doing this, it also allows our clients to put all of their RBC payment cards, not just one, but all, including their Interac debit, their primary credit card, and increasingly a second merchant co-brand credit card on the phone, ensuring that the client has choice in how to pay. We are committed to not steering clients to one payment instrument over another. In the middle of the slide, RBC Secure Cloud calls that payment data down from our data center and prepares it for payment. Our solution today relies on the phone's near-field communication, or NFC, antenna as that last inch between the consumer and the merchant. Merchants that today accept contactless debit or credit card payments are ready to accept RBC mobile payments. They do not need to change anything. While there are many emerging alternatives to NFC, with 19 and actually recently now 20 of the top 25 merchants accepting contactless payments in Canada, we believe NFC provides the greatest opportunity for ubiquitous, universal acceptance. We are very confident in the security engineered into RBC's payment cards and the fraud prevention systems that are behind them. RBC Secure Cloud takes payment security to a new level. Once the payment has been provided to the merchant, there's no difference whether a client swiped, dipped, or tapped their payment card or used their mobile phone to pay. The merchant gets paid at the lowest cost possible based on the payment instrument the client chose. Thank you for having us here this morning. We hope we explained how our solution addresses consumers' and merchants' needs for choice, security, and low-cost payment.
Thank you, panel, for your presentations. I have a number of senators who want to ask questions. I will start with Senator Maltais, to be followed by Senator Massicotte. Senator Maltais.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I just learned that we're allowed to use for our debit card to pay for things. I didn't realize that. There's been no advertisement on that. A debit card without inserting it in the machine. I didn't know. So, good to know. As long as I see that it's an RBC card too. Thank you. Just wait a moment. What I'm wondering about when it comes to digital currency is I'm trying to find how to discover how it's useful for ordinary consumers, for regular consumers. I'm not talking about people who are transferring funds from one country to another. I have nothing against that. But here, we represent regular people, workers who earn under $60,000. Those people need to be protected. Yesterday, we received a demonstration by Bitcoin specialists. So the guy can buy Bitcoins in the morning, may buy $500 worth of Bitcoins in the morning, but by that evening, if it's been devalued, he's got 3 cents. He's got 300 left in his account, and he's out 200. Whereas at the bank, if I have $500 in my account, I've got $487 in bills to pay. I know that that night, all my bills will have been paid, and that I'll have a few dollars left over. So that's the first protection that they do not provide us with. For the average consumer, never mind the others, but for the average consumer, how would this be advantageous? I remember when ATMs first came about. It took me time to trust them. I was a bit mistrustful, and I'd get confused with the buttons. But now I've learned how to use them, and I'd say that that's been successfully implemented across the country. I think those work fairly well. But the average consumer has no concern as to its money, or doesn't want to be worried about his or her money. You know, we went through the 2008 crisis, and the value of things was dropping as fast as we were eating our toast in the morning, and people don't want to see that anymore. If people have savings, they want them to be safe. And the money that they have for everyday spending, they need that to be safe as well. So tell me, these new forms of digital currency, and I'm not speaking to any particular group, but any kind of new currency, can they be guaranteed as safe for consumers?
Senator, I think your question is fantastic, and I think you've really hit the nail on the head. When you put money in a bank account, the bank, first off, you have the security associated with that. You know that it's a well-run, well-regulated, safe and secure institution. Especially in Canada, we have the strongest banking system in the world, have had for several years and continue to have. And you know that the bank will be offering you a mechanism to transact electronically, such as the one that Ms. Burke has just described, that is safe, secure, and gives you all of that convenience along with the security associated with it. And you know that what you've deposited were Canadian dollars, what you're spending are Canadian dollars, and what's left is Canadian dollars. If you're going out and using a digital currency instead, frankly, you have to understand that what happens at that point in time is exactly to your point, that you are literally selling your Canadian currency, getting something else, subjecting yourself to the exchange rate risk, and doing all of this outside of the regulated financial systems, and therefore outside of the umbrella and blanket of security that you get associated with that. So, to your point, does a consumer get additional value from using that mechanism? Not from our perspective, frankly. From my perspective, banks provide fantastic mechanisms to be able to help you transact electronically with those accounts, and do so with the security and safety associated with that.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair.
Senator Mascotte. Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci à notre témoin.
We're learning lots, and we got lots to learn, so thank you for your help in getting us there. Maybe ask Ms. Burke, yesterday we heard testimony from one person that because he was trading in Bitcoins, his business was trading in Bitcoins, I'm not sure you heard the testimony, but his account was closed, and that there was a natural suspicion or prejudice against people dealing Bitcoins, even though it shouldn't affect your account. Obviously, your account is obviously Canadian dollars. Is that the case? And what's the orientation of banks towards those people who may be transacting in Bitcoins?
Currently, Bitcoin is unregulated, and the government's also said that there are concerns around the source of funds and knowing the client. So it is not something that a bank can put through the normal processes that we would have. For example, today, if you come in with cash or you come in with another currency to deposit, of course we go through anti-money laundering, anti-terrorism. We know the source of funds. That's just not possible with Bitcoin.
I appreciate that. I think in this case, he's not asking to convert Bitcoins. He's in a business, he's a miner of Bitcoins, so nothing to do with Bitcoins, but given that he will occasionally ask withdrawals from his account to purchase Bitcoins, or the reverse, but he's not asking to take Bitcoins. He's basically saying just that in itself caused you to cancel his account.
So our RBC has no issue with institutions or businesses that are accepting Bitcoin for payment. Our challenge today is businesses that specifically are profiting from the exchange of Bitcoin either in or out of the currency. Because exactly of the reason that Carolyn mentioned, we do not understand the source of those funds, and we cannot put them through the proper regulatory screens of AML and ATF financing.
But if they tell you, if you look at the FINTRAC regulations, they're telling us that anybody open an account with them, they identify the person, more identity than you do, like basically driver's permit, so on, so on. Did you ask them those questions to make sure they did their homework re-FINTRAC? And if that is the case, why would you object? Why would you take a position on that? I guess I would say, consider a commodity. You get a lot of clients, I'm sure, deal with commodities, and you don't close them down automatically. He's saying you do close them down automatically.
I'm not sure of the specifics around this particular case, so it's difficult to address. But by and large, our issue goes back to being able to understand the source of funds.
Okay. If I can go on, I got to admit, it gives a sense of this is a competitor of yours. You protect your own turf, and therefore I'm going to prejudice myself. I'm going to make sure I get an advantage over any competitor. It looks that way, given, but I don't know the details. Let me go on to.
If I could just address that, I think that's inaccurate. There are other commodities where we can actually understand where the funds have gone. We can understand if the funds are coming back, and there is some traceability, and it comes down to knowing our clients. And that's a regulatory obligation that we take on willingly. In the case of Bitcoin, these are anonymous transactions. There is no traceability, and we can attest to the fact that we do know our clients. So I really object to the fact that you think it's a competitive issue. It is not.
On the traceability, we've heard very contrary to testimony. In fact, the Bank of Canada representative said, no, as you know, for every Bitcoin transaction, there's actually a chain. And they can actually find out all the time. It's like internet. When it started, everybody says it's going to be anonymous, but it's not. And the same thing that we've had many experts says, it's traceable. You can actually find out it's a historical record. Who was the owner of that Bitcoin? And if you go back to the exchange, you can find out who that person was. I guess you don't buy that, eh?
The actual situation is that, yes, indeed, the transactions are traceable, and that's one of the benefits of Bitcoin itself, is that the transactions are irrevocable, and they're logged in this blockchain. There is no name attached to that transaction, not an exchange, not in the blockchain itself. That transaction is actually anonymous, and that code has not been
It's
yet
like
revealed.
the internet. If you want to go back to the person, or the miner, or the exchange, just like the internet, you can go back to a server. You can go back to Rogers and find out who issued the internet.
Right. So there is no Rogers behind.
But there is
Bitcoin.
an exchange. Like, for instance, the person we met yesterday, he has a record exactly of who is the client, and if you wanted to, I'm sure the police could find out who that person was.
Senator, I think what you're touching on a very interesting point here. It's a very important point. And what I think what you're getting at is that both users, consumers, and in fact firms that deal in Bitcoin or any other payment form would benefit from a robust regulatory framework so that everybody understood what the rights, responsibilities, safety, soundness, security were associated with the payment mechanism. And that's something that from a CBA perspective we strongly support. We think that payments should be regulated in that way so that irrespective of which payment service provider you use, you will have certainty about its strength, about its stability, about the framework, about the rights and responsibilities that you have, and that those are fully disclosed to you, and that you've got recourse if something goes wrong. And I think that would allay a lot of the issues that you're raising, because that's exactly the question. This is very much an unregulated space, and that creates a challenge.
It is the issue, I think, facing our committee, is your need for regulation, and what kind. You seem to be suggesting that the regulation should be equal nearly to a bank. In other words, be part of a member of the payment system, I guess have assurance, I presume, and you're asking, like, a lot of comfort for those doing the trading. It is an option. It is something we need to look at. But you realize that another option, like Revenue Canada's taking a position, like the RS is saying, this is a commodity. This is like dealing in gold. It's like dealing in silver. And we don't have those safeguards for the commodity traders. Now, and one could argue we're not trying to replace our currency, our national currency. There's no need to do so. I don't know why we would do so. I don't know why the bank and Canadians would accept to lose that monetary control and comfort. But why not let a different form of payment flourish without the impediments and the burdensome, if you wish, of all this regulation? There must be something leaner and more efficient, which would cost increased costs. Is there not, in your opinion?
The challenge, Senator, with what I understand where you're coming from, Senator. The challenge is that the average consumer on the street typically won't walk in with a barrel of oil or a pound of gold and expect that they can pay for something. It's not marketed as something that is to be used by individuals for small transactions on a person-to-person basis. When you get into digital currencies, in fact, there's a lot of that. In fact, I believe you saw a Bitcoin-related ATM. So that there's not the bifurcation or distinction. There are a number of people out there who I'm certain view this as a payment mechanism in exactly the same way that they pay with a credit card or a debit card or any other standard retail payment mechanism, and they may not fully distinguish the difference, and that's our concern.
Yeah, but why would the Canadian taxpayer, why would Canadians, when you say regulation, they're obviously going to be the public person, why would Canadian taxpayers get involved in a situation where they guarantee and assume that risk? Let the buyer beware. If a person wants to trade in Bitcoins, he's very much aware today, and we've heard about it. In fact, 80% of owners of Bitcoins are speculators. They know the risk. Why would Canadians wish to protect those parties from any loss? Let it go. And if it succeeds, it succeeds. And maybe in 5 years we'll regulate it. But why not let it flourish and buyer beware?
We're not asking for anything over the top from our perspective. From our perspective, what we're asking for is just a basic level of regulation so that you can have comfort that what you're using is safe and secure and that you can get recourse if you need it. We're not, and in fact, I think from our perspective, for the sound, well-run payment services non-bank payment service providers that are out there already, these are standards they would probably already meet because they're good business practice. And for those that aren't, this gives them a roadmap to get to where they need to be in order to actually have consumer confidence. So I hear where you're coming from, Senator. It's just from our perspective, this provides, in fact, a good foundation and a step up. And for a lot of those firms, it's already something that they would need.
Senator Mascott, for second
Okay,
round, I
please
have a
do.
long
Please
list.
do.
Senator Belmar, to be followed by Senator Ringett.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Alors, je vais...
Thank you, Chairman. So I would like to ask you to carry on in the same line of questioning. I think we all know that Canada's banking system is very efficient, is very effective, is innovative, and has proven its worth. Now, we know that there are costs related to our transactional system. And yesterday, we received, as you know, people who represented the Bitcoin industry. Their major argument was that Bitcoin, and we still don't know if it's actually a currency, a commodity, a payment method, that's another discussion, but in their opinion, the Bitcoin, when used as a transaction tool, is a huge innovation because it costs so little in transaction costs, especially at the international level. So for e-commerce and all that type of thing, that the regular conventional banking sector cannot offer such low transaction costs. We received a few examples. So you buy bitcoins, and you know that at the other end they're going to receive the bitcoins. It won't be a reduced amount, and that's what they said. But with respect to the volatility, they said that this whole system that's being set up so that the bitcoin's value not be volatile over the course of one day at least. So there will be long-term trends instead. I wanted to hear your response to that. The fact that Bitcoin's transaction costs are so low that it's going to add a great deal of value to our economy, which the banking system cannot currently do, but that it could perhaps do if it also offered this type of currency as part of their services. So how would you react to that? You can see that this is all very interesting, but there are costs associated with this. There are costs associated for the merchant and for the client. So for the customers, rather. So what is your response to that? It will be very interesting to see what the effect will be. And perhaps we could start with Darren and then Jeremy to help us better understand the facts.
Senator, because it's an important one, and I think it's something of a myth or a misunderstanding. Let's walk through what a transaction would look like if I were to actually try to send you $100 using Bitcoin. Because bear in mind, Bitcoin itself right now is relatively illiquid. So my transaction is going to start with Canadian dollars, and presumably you want Canadian dollars because that's what you need to be able to transact. So let's walk through what that would actually cost. And I'm not making these numbers up. I'm actually just using the numbers off of one of the major Bitcoin exchanges here in Canada. The exchange is going to charge you $5 first to load your $100 up to them onto your account with them. They're going to charge you 1.5% then to take your Canadian dollars and exchange them for Bitcoin. I'm going to send it over to, say, Jeremy, and I'll have him talk in a moment about what the implications of that, but I'm going to send it to him. The exchange is going to charge him another 1.5% to change it back from Bitcoin to Canadian dollars, and then charge him another $6 to take it out of the Bitcoin exchange back to himself. If you add that all up, that $100 transaction has cost you $14 alone. And there's another element to this, and I'll let Jeremy speak to that.
Thank you. Yeah, so the exchange of Bitcoin additionally between parties, so assuming one is not paying a business, but one is just doing a standard person-to-person transfer, which today the bank or banks such as RBC offer as a free service to clients, there is costs and there is friction involved in there. Presumably, we each have commercial wallets. We have not gone and programmed or created our own wallet, which could conceptually happen. In that case, these wallets are for-profit institutions, and that transaction has a minimum cost of at least 1% to transfer the funds from Darren to myself. The additional challenge that many consumers will face in the use of Bitcoin is not only the volatility, but the fact that these are illiquid and they're traded on numerous exchanges. The price of Bitcoin today, I'm not quoting exact numbers, but the price of Bitcoin today may be at $400 US to Bitcoin, but depending on which exchange you go to, that may be anywhere from $250 to $800. And so it's incumbent on the client then to search out the numerous exchanges around the world to determine where to make that exchange. Many of the services, such as one ATM in particular that I visited and used, charges a 3.5% load fee. On top of that, averages 6 exchanges, so you're getting a far lower cost or far more expensive Bitcoin than if you were to do this going on the web or just using the Canadian dollar.
Mais le système bancaire ici, moi ce que on a parlé.
But the banking system here, now you've talked about numbers, but what might be interesting, Mr. Chairman, is for you to provide the committee with comparative costs of using Bitcoin and using more conventional payment methods. What we do know is that user cards can be expensive, and we know that when you pay with debit cards, people have fees associated with that, depending on their arrangement with their financial institution, and merchants have to pay fees as well, so it all adds up to a fair bit. But it would be good for us to have something concrete that we can, that shows us the difference in the transaction costs from one or the other, as well as when it comes to foreign currencies.
I believe it's something we can certainly take away between the CBA and RBC.
Thank you, and if you could kindly provide that to the clerk of the committee, that'd be
On
greatly
a
appreciated.
mentionné récemment un transfert de centre.
We talked about the example of transferring a $100 amount in a Canadian bank. Because for consumers are protected if they're using a bank, and the funds can be transferred from one person to another within our banks with no cost at all. What about foreign currencies? Well, given that Canadian transfers between Canadians in bitcoins, that doesn't involve foreign currencies. Yes, but let's say a merchant wishes to buy some products abroad, and has to pay for those in foreign currencies, and there are costs associated with all those international transactions. Also, a person who wishes to use e-commerce to buy products, well, this is certainly something we can produce, but the point I'm trying to make here is if I am a merchant and I buy something in the U.S., $4,000, let's say, I transfer Canadian funds or American funds, and if I buy in bitcoins, I have a Canadian transfer from Bitcoin to Bitcoin to the U.S., then we're paying double costs. It's twice the cost as foreign currency costs, because you're converting twice from Bitcoin to.
Senator Ranguette, to be followed by Senator Black.
Thank you, Chair. And as a member for, I think, 8 years now with the Banking Committee, it's the first time that we have the Banking Association coming in front of us asking for regulations.
Thank you, Senator.
And in regards to the fact that you have indicated to us that the banking institution in Canada do provide a guarantee in regards to e-transaction. I have noticed in the last year quite a number of difficulties that some of your clients and merchants have received in regards to issues of fraud and losses, and some of your members are refusing to meet their obligation in regards to the loss incurred because of losses through e-transactions and so forth. So I think I take your statement with some reservation because of the different public issue that has come out. In addition to you requesting regulation, the group that was in front of us yesterday also are asking regulation. And as Senator Massicotte has indicated, they see that they're providing a service mostly because the banking entities in Canada and elsewhere in the world have been asking for transaction costs and exchange rate that are too high in the current world market. And for 6 years you've been arguing against capping off merchant rates, and you're saying that the market, if what you're providing is not good for the market, the free market will come out with another service. Now there's another service, and you're asking for regulation. You seem to be wanting to have both ends, and I have some difficulty with that. Now, coming back to the issue of bitcoins. Are you, as a banking community in Canada, looking at alternatives, competitive alternatives to Bitcoin?
Oh, sorry, Jonathan. Go ahead.
Let
Yes,
them reply or
based
you're
on the
gonna run out of
cost.
time.
Based on the cost. Based on the cost.
Okay, let me start because there were about 4 or 5 different things in there. I mean, I'll try to start from the top. Let me be clear on one statement first, because you talked about liability, and I think what you were getting towards was zero liability. The zero liability policy of institutions and networks is abundantly clear, and we all abide by it. In fact, our oversight, our compliance with it is overseen. If you are an unwitting victim of fraud, you will not be liable for the transaction. That is entirely clear. I appreciate there are occasional cases that you will see in the press where people claim that they have not been properly dealt with. From our perspective, the zero liability policy is entirely clear and is fully implemented, and we think it's important. So let me be clear on that. Secondly, you talked about pricing. As we just discussed, when you walk through what it actually costs to make a Bitcoin transaction from beginning to end, starting in Canadian dollars, ending in Canadian dollars, what you end up seeing is what great value you get as a merchant from accepting credit cards as a payment mechanism, because not only do you get better pricing than the pricing I just articulated in Bitcoin, but you get along with that the assurance that you get of a strong, stable, well-run network. You get reduced cash handling expenses, you get the ability to sell on credit, and you get everything associated with that. You get it's what it proves is that you get fantastic value.
And the fees.
With respect to the question about regulation, as I mentioned earlier, all we are looking for is some basic level of safety, soundness, and security to make sure that if you enter the market, you're doing so in a way that helps customers have certainty that the service that is being provided is one that is safe, sound, secure, well-run, and that you are fully informed as a consumer or a merchant about what your rights and responsibilities are, and that you have some kind of recourse if something goes wrong. That's really all we're looking for. And as for why it is that some institutions were coming in asking for the same thing, I dare say in a lot of cases it's because, as I mentioned earlier, they already meet those standards and would welcome that certainty and would welcome then the roadmap for those that don't to actually get to that point.
Well,
Please follow up. Mr.
there's-
Bornstein, do you have anything to add?
My question, one of my questions was in regards to, are you in the process of looking at a competitive alternative, because down the road you have not been willing to reduce your transaction costs, whether it's with a credit card or even a exchange rate into foreign currency, or expediting funds to another country. So it's coming to bite. My question was, are you in the process right now at looking at a competitive alternative to Bitcoin, because they are becoming and will become a major competitor for your profit centers?
Senator, what I would say is we already have a very competitive alternative, and that's the existing payment card and payment networks that we have in Canada for electronic payments and electronic transactions. That is an innovative platform. New innovations are coming out, some of which were already described, and as I already mentioned earlier, it's remarkably cost-effective compared to Bitcoin.
Well, you have not provided, and as Senator Belmont has asked you, you have not provided what are the costs. I'm supposing.
providing that to us, Senator. I'm going to have to put you
I
down
still
for a
have
second.
no answer in regards to if they're looking at competitive alternatives, but that's okay.
Okay, we're going to go to put you down for a second round and move to
Yes.
Senator Black, please, to be followed by Senator Unger. We have great interest in this topic.
Thank you very
No
much,
shortage of
Mr. Chairman.
questions.
Thank you all for being here, and Mr. Hanna, thank you for being back with us. I started my career as a banking lawyer, so I'm very alert and appreciative to the fact that caution is a very important aspect of the business that you do, because it not only serves your business, it serves Canadians, and I acknowledge and appreciate that. And also, by way of introduction, I would just like to commend RBC for the community work that you do across Canada, the tremendous and deep community work you do. And I want to use this opportunity to recognize the contribution that you have made and continue to make on an ongoing basis.
Thank you
I
very
have
much.
3 questions, if I may. The first question relates, perhaps Mr. Hanna, you'd be best to address this. Last Tuesday, the Chief Executive Officer of the Bank of Montreal, when asked to comment in respect of virtual currencies, indicated that his view was that if virtual currencies were reliable and regulated, then there's no reason, and I'm quoting, there's no reason why we shouldn't be an intermediary in Bitcoin-related transaction. He continued to say, if Bitcoin can be a reliable medium of exchange, then at some point in the future, we may be able to conduct business with Bitcoin. My question to you is, how would you define a reliable medium of exchange?
Okay, it's a good question. I don't want to put words in obviously the executive's mouth. I can't speak for what he had in mind. What I would say is, and as I've said earlier, because I think what he was pointing at is the need for some sort of regulatory framework so that we can have some certainty about the safety, soundness, and security of any payment mechanism, including Bitcoin. So I, as an institution or as an individual, in fact, know that what I'm using has a certain degree of safety and security behind it. I know what I know what my rights and responsibilities are, and I can have confidence, and even my clients can have confidence that if there's any problem, they can get the problem resolved.
You bet. But you would identify, I presume, from your comments around innovation, that his comment is a justifiable comment. If it's reliable and regulated, why not?
Well, if it's then you get into a business question, and each individual firm will obviously make its own decisions about what business lines they want to get into, but it certainly does make the product more viable at that point in time. Whether a firm chooses to use it or not ultimately is a firm level decision.
Building on that, my second question, and likely can be responded to by all 3, was yesterday the panel that we heard from, who were advocating regulation, they said that they suggested to us that one way to simply regulate these transactions would be to define Bitcoin under the foreign exchange regulation and compliance requirements in Canada. So my question is, does that make sense to you? Does that work?
I appreciate the intent, but the challenge is then that I still need certainty that the mechanisms by which it is being exchanged or transacted are safe, secure, and sound. That if I'm moving it to a wallet or I'm moving it to an exchange to hold it, that they do so safely. They meet the sort of security expectations that you would want to have. That they disclose to me fully what my rights and responsibilities are, what I'm going to be paying, what I can expect, what kind of recourse I have if something goes wrong. So it's not just the mechanism, but it's not just the digital currency per se, but it's the mechanism around to actually give effect to that.
And they were suggesting that the regulations that govern the foreign exchange transactions in Canada now pick up all of those concerns. Would you agree with that?
And that I can't answer honestly.
Very well. Could you answer that, Mr. Bornstein or Ms. Burke?
One of our issues with digital currencies and Bitcoin in particular is that it's designed to elude our ability to understand its source of funds, and therefore we cannot satisfy our AML and our ATF requirements.
See, that is interesting, and I don't know. I know very, very little. I'm just learning now. But other witnesses have told us that, in fact, the Bitcoin protocols are more transparent than other existing protocols. We've heard evidence on this. You disagree?
We disagree.
Okay, fair enough. Well, Mr. Bornstein, and my last question, Mr. Chairman, if I may, and it's let's set all of this aside. Help me understand what role digital currencies, in your view, will have 5 years from now.
You know, to Senator Ringette's point, we spend a lot of time, especially in my group, as well as involving other teams around the bank, looking at these innovations and these different solutions and trying to envision what need are they satisfying of our clients, both merchant and consumer. We haven't yet identified or understood what that unmet need is that these digital currencies are solving for. And so it's difficult to imagine 5 years from now how they will play into the banking fabric.
Do you believe they will have a role?
As we've said earlier, you know, consumers and merchants are looking for choice, convenience, and confidence in the system that they use. I think Canadians have been well served by the payment system. We see payment systems around the world, and when you look at the overall cost of payments, with our low-cost Interact debit, along with credit and other means of payment, when we look at our technology advancements in Canada, both in chip and in near-field communications, we are the leader in electronic payments and choice. So I do believe we're seeing a lot of headlines, but we're not seeing a lot of traction on digital currency because the need simply isn't there in Canada.
And you would expect, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you would expect that trend to continue. So you would suggest to me this might be a fad.
RBC is dedicated to ensuring that we meet our customers' needs over time. As customers' needs evolve, we will constantly be there. Jeremy and his group are working with them to make sure that we are there and we're meeting their needs. So I really don't see the need for a separate digital currency in Canada's economy today.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you all very much. Tremendous help.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Senator
Chairman.
Unger, to be followed by Senator Green.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for your presentations. Very interesting. I'm very new to this, although I've been reading and hearing about Bitcoin. So it's your presentations and all of the exchanges are very interesting. I've heard the word volatility used a lot with regard to Bitcoin, and I've also heard that banks are safe, sound, and secure. I'm wondering, can the relative price of a Bitcoin be manipulated by entities that hold large numbers of Bitcoins and or by computers that can create fraudulent transactions?
Unfortunately, I don't believe that we are qualified to respond to that. There has been certain press releases or discussions around that, but not certain.
But to your point about volatility, there is no doubt that that Bitcoin is incredibly volatile in its price from day to day, and therefore you as a consumer, if you choose to use it as a payment mechanism, expose yourself to that volatility in a way that you don't if you use a more conventional payment mechanism offered by a financial institution.
Thank you, and I'd like to assure you that as a bank customer all my life, I have no intentions of venturing into this. Thank you.
Thank you. That was not a question, I assume.
But we appreciate the vote of confidence.
Yeah.
Senator Green, please.
Thank you very much. It occurs to me that the value of Bitcoin, that the purpose, the strength, the need for it is that it allows peer-to-peer transactions without going through the banking system or any national payment system where there's a lot of costs. So that is a very valuable thing. Now, at this point in time, the value of that, it seems to me, is theoretical in a sense because there's not a lot of peer-to-peer transactions. It requires, to some extent, a degree of trust or something like that, which is not present yet. But theoretically, it's possible. If in a few years' time, 5 or 10 or whatever, that the number of peer-to-peer transactions improves and becomes larger, do you see then that digital coins such as the Bitcoin would have a positive contribution?
Today at RBC in particular, we're very proud to offer our clients up to 10 free monthly person-to-person P2P transactions at no cost within Canada. Additionally, we have many other free ways to move money between people, which cause very little friction and are very easy to use. They're on the mobile phone. We recently released a service which allows our clients to exchange money between peers using Facebook at no cost, up to 10 transactions per month as well. So we believe we have, as Carolyn has mentioned, a number of wonderful solutions in the market that are serving Canadians well at very low cost today. And we expect that trend to continue.
So in your peer-to-peer transactions, let me see where I'm going with this. Supposing the Bank of Canada decides to move into digital currency and allow the Canadian dollar to be held digitally, which could lead to people being paid in a digital Canadian dollars as opposed to putting Canadian dollars into their bank accounts, so that the money would be held online in their online wallets, as it were, as opposed to in their Canadian bank accounts. Do you see? And the advantage of that, it seems to me, is that it would reduce costs throughout the system, be much more efficient. Do you see that as a possibility in the future?
We're working with the Canadian government today to allow consumers without bank accounts to have payments made onto prepaid cards. In essence, that is digital currency. It's an electronic payment to a card that they can then use to shop or buy things with safety and not carrying around cash. So I think, today if you look at Canadians' paychecks, 9 out of 10 paychecks are deposited electronically, automatically to their bank account. You can ask yourself, is that digital currency?
No,
Perhaps.
that's not. I would say that is not. Because the funds are not held digitally, really. I mean, they are held in your bank account online, which you can have access to. But peer-to-peer transactions there might be a few that are allowed. I'm not sure how you do that, but it's not what the Bitcoin is supposed to be doing.
Senator, the challenge with your question is that it's what you're envisioning is a paradigm that would be fundamentally different from that in which we currently live. So it brings into question a whole bunch of issues that are difficult to sort of grapple with. For instance, one that would obviously come up is, how then do you freely exchange between the physical and the virtual? What's the implication of that? Do they trade at the same price? Are there? It creates a whole bunch of interesting questions. Trying to figure out how they would all offset would be quite a thought experiment.
Right. No, I agree with you. But I think that's where we're headed. We had a number of presentations already, which implied or said that the digital currency is about where the internet was about 15 years ago, and that we're just at the tip of the iceberg, and you either jump on the iceberg or you get run over by the iceberg. I mean, that's the implication. So anyway, no.
Senator, I think it comes down to what consumers and merchants want to do with their money. They're looking for the benefits. They're not looking for the technology. And what they want to do is be able to transact with security and confidence and have choice in how they do that. If they want to do it electronically with a phone, they should be able to do that. If they want to be able to make a person-to-person payment electronically, digitally, they should be able to do that. But they should be able to do that with confidence and security. So certainly they're looking for the benefit. I don't think they're looking necessarily for the underlying technology.
I'm not sure what that means, really. But
Thank you, Senator Green. Senator Poirier, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for allowing me to. I'm not part of the regular committee, so a lot of this is new to me today, hearing what I'm hearing. But I'm just trying to understand when we talk Bitcoins, just say for the argument of the question that working with Bitcoins or working with transaction within the banks or debit, that the transaction fees would be similar. Okay, just say that they're exactly. What would be the advantage or disadvantage of a person why would we want to use a Bitcoin compared to what we're using now? Because if the transaction fees would be similar, exactly the same, because from what I'm understanding, our chair said that he bought some Bitcoins yesterday morning, but by last night he'd already lost money. So that reminds me that it sounds like a stock market thing. Okay? So if it's like a stock market thing where you're not secure of your money, does that mean that there's a chance that he could have made money too? And is that the advantage of going to a Bitcoin, because you could increase the value of what you bought instead of just losing it? Or I'm just trying to understand what would be the advantage of getting a Bitcoin compared taking away the administration fees.
Do you want me to? I'll answer that.
anyone
I'll
can.
start and say the short answer is there is none. From our perspective, working through an existing financial institution with the electronic products that they make available to you will offer you a better client experience, better security, better confidence, clearer disclosure, and certainty associated with that.
So, do you know with the Bitcoin if there is the possibility of losing the value of your Bitcoin during the day? Is there also the possibility of increasing the value? Is that the game that the people like to play, or it's similar to stock market?
Certainly, that is a possibility. It is a highly volatile currency, and indeed there are people who actually trade it for that specific purpose. Our concern, obviously, though, is it's one thing to engage in trading knowing that that's what's going to happen and trying to arbitrage that. It's another thing with me simply buying Bitcoin today with the intent of using it as a mechanism to pay somebody tomorrow, and then all of a sudden having the value of your holdings drop by 20% overnight.
Certainly there is, for a certain contingent, the value of anonymity. And the financial tracking that banks do would not apply to Bitcoin, but we would not promote that as an advantage.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to clarify that my motivation was neither to make money or to be anonymous, but rather for demonstration purposes only. That concludes round one. We are at the end of our time, but I do have 3 individuals on round 2 who would like to get questions on the record. If you can answer quickly, I would ask you to do so. If not, would you be good enough to reply in writing to us? I will start with Senator Massicotte, please.
Very quick question. Obviously, I agree with you that the use of Bitcoin there's costs that are not very publicized. But let's talk about your costs. Let's talk maybe RBC. Could you give us, just very quickly, what's the total cost to the user, to the merchant, to everybody concerned transaction to use a debit card? Let's say $100 transaction. How much would it cost you a debit card? How much would it cost you as a credit card to all parties? And what's the other? You mentioned 3 options.
There's also store cards or prepaid cards.
Okay, tell me what's the total cost of those 3 over $400 purchase.
Well, let's talk about a consumer perspective for a second. Yeah. So the majority of consumers have bank accounts with packages, and debit would be free. Certainly our Interac Flash debit is free, so it's basically all you can eat. And many of our younger consumers in particular use it extensively.
Okay, credit card?
Can I just finish with the merchant side?
Yeah. Okay. Because my chairman's going to give me crap if I don't go quickly enough.
Is it possible that you could respond in writing to us on this?
Certainly, we'd be happy to.
We can include this as part
of
the cost comparison between the
I guess what I want to get at, if I could, Chairman, I bet you the answer is going to be is that the Interac, I presume, is a lot cheaper to the total parties involved in the transaction than a credit card.
It is. It also has different qualities.
Yeah, and you made a statement earlier that you don't discriminate as a policy. You're
Correct.
And yet I see a lot of advertisements for credit cards. I get a lot of letters with credit cards. Yet I rarely get any advertisements for Interac. Neither do I get letters recommending Interac.
I'm very disappointed you haven't noticed our massive Interac advertising campaign that's out there right now.
We're going to get the response to the questions in terms of the cost.
Okay.
Senator Bellemare to be concluded by Senator Ringuet. Quick and snappy, please.
Yes, Monsieur le Président. Alors, c'est une question.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a question or an issue that I just wanted to put there for discussion purposes. It's just a hypothesis for now. Let's say that digital currency such as Bitcoin manages to resolve the issue of fraud in the system. Let's suppose that the fact that Bitcoins have a limited mass in time. Let's say that it's assessed at $21 million, and the fact that international trade is increasing a great deal Do you not think that since the value of Bitcoin is limited, and with the increase of international trade, in the long term, the value of Bitcoin will increase over time? And because of that increased value, Bitcoin has possibilities to storing value, as well as major credibility as a payment method. So could you tell me what you think of that? Although it is speculative.
Sleep at night is because I don't engage in foreign exchange transactions. It's speculative. Could it happen potentially? But I think our concern isn't so much with people who are isn't related to people who are using it as a commodity to buy back and forth and arbitrage on. Our concern is with people who are using it as a payment mechanism and what the risks they're facing.
Merci.
Thank you very much. And to conclude our questions, Senator Redpath, please.
I am in the same view as Senator Green. You have cost yourself out of the market. Well, that's my premise. but to reach your point, I see that this is the future, and it is based on cost, and the fact that people will, with this process, not have to need a bank account with all the fees attached to it in order to make transactions, buy stuff, and receive payments. I think that you should be very concerned. That's a comment. I don't need a response.
Question on the record? No question. All right, quick response
If I could.
to the non-question.
Canadian merchants benefit from one of the best payment systems on earth, and their
They
blended
pay
cost
highly for it too.
cost between debit and credit cards is among the lowest on earth. Some of these alternative payment systems actually cost much, much more, and as you do the research, you would find that they're free to use them. They are actually more costly with more inherent risk.
Thank you very much. You can tell by the nature of our questions, you've been very provocative, very helpful. On behalf of all of the members of the Banking Committee, I express our great appreciation for your appearance today. The committee will recess for 2 minutes, and we will bring on our next panel. Thank you. Canadian Payments Association. The mandate of the Canadian Payments Association is to establish, operate, and maintain systems for the clearing and settlement of payments. The association will provide the committee information on the payment systems currently used by different institutions, which will allow the committee to compare payment systems as they apply to different types of currencies. Representing the Canadian Payment Association is Ms. Carol Ann Northcott, Vice President and Chief Risk Officer, and Mr. Doug Krevichuk, Vice President of Policy and Public Affairs. We welcome you both, and I understand, Mr. Krevichuk, you have an opening statement.
I do. Thank you very much,
Thank you. Welcome to our
Mr.
committee.
Chair. The Canadian Payments Association is very pleased to be here to present before your committee on this important study of digital currency. So thank you for the opportunity, and it's my pleasure to be here. We have prepared a short deck that will follow my remarks, so please refer to that. Your study on digital currency is both timely and important. And indeed, hardly a day goes by anymore where you don't see firms like Bitcoin in the headlines. But it's not just about cryptocurrencies that are making the headlines. The Canadian payments ecosystem is highly dynamic, with changes and innovations taking place in many fronts. Innovative products and services that provide increased convenience and efficiency for consumers also increase the complexity and heighten risk in the payments ecosystem. And as such, payments in general are getting a lot of attention both in Canada and globally, and regulators are looking more closely examining payment systems to ensure the appropriate level of oversight and regulation. And there is a critical need to ensure that there is a balance between safety and soundness and innovation and efficiency. And we believe that research and monitoring the developments is essential for policy development and risk management. So in short today, I'd like to examine the key elements of the Canadian payment system, touch upon the broad payments ecosystem, and share some of our research and insights into the various payment trends focusing in on emerging payment items. So with respect to key elements of the payment system, Canadians need payments they can count on. In this regard, the Canadian Payments Association plays an important role in the day-to-day financial lives of Canadians. Under our mandate, as set out in the Canadian Payments Act, we provide the policies, the rules, and the infrastructure that support and manage the daily exchange and reconciliation of customer payments between Canadian financial institutions. At the end of every business day, financial institutions also need a way to settle up those obligations resulting from their clients' financial transactions. And the CPA provides the risk-proof settlement infrastructure over which financial institutions can confidently make these payments. The Canadian Payments Act also assigns a specific public policy mandate to our organization. We're called upon to take into account the needs of users in the design and operation of our rule set, our policies, our standards, and our infrastructure. Risks that can exist at any point in the ecosystem, from the exchange of a fraudulent check to a cyber attack on an electronic payment system. For this reason, we maintain an ongoing monitor and analysis of systemic, operational, and other risks in the payment system and respond appropriately. The CPA's public policy reach covers the majority of value moving through the Canadian payment system. If for a moment we exclude the transactions of cash, the value of payments made by Canadians, government, and business in 2012 amounted to approximately $16.7 trillion, and that was about 12 billion payment items. 80% of all of this value, or $13.4 trillion, were cleared through the systems of the CPA. And this includes, among other things, checks, debit card transactions at the point of sale, pre-authorized debits, direct deposits, and wire transfers. The remaining 20%, or approximately $3.3 trillion, are outside of the CPA and are composed of on-us financial transactions at financial institutions, credit cards, closed-loop schemes that include prepaid cards, electronic wallets, and cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. And while there are many payment systems, not all of these payment systems require the services of our clearing and settlement system at CPA. This illustration really depicts the broadest possible view of the Canadian payments ecosystem. And when you think about it, there's really 4 categories of payment systems. The first, here shown as the light blue, is the CPA's National Clearing and Settlement System, which is located at the core of the payments ecosystem. Our retail payment system, the Automated Clear and Settlement System, or the ACSS, as we call it, it tracks the exchange of retail payments between CPA member institutions and calculates the overall balances owed to and from each of these institutions every single day. The Large Value Transfer System, or our LVTS, is an electronic wire transfer system that's also used to settle out the balances in our retail system. Each of these 2 systems is supported by a comprehensive framework of rules and standards and an Act of Parliament. The second category are the private networks, or schemes, here shown in gray, such as Interac or Telpay. They operate their own payment services, but rely on the CPA's retail framework for clearing and settlement. So for example, an Interac payment made at the point of sale happens pursuant to our rules. And then those items flow through our retail clearing system, the ACSS. The third level of payment systems are shown here in the dark blue. And they include systems like the Visas, like the MasterCards, and they do not rely on the CPA's retail clearing and settlement system. Rather, they only rely on our large value system in order to settle out the payment obligations between the various participants. And in addition to the credit cards, this category also includes Canadian financial market infrastructures like securities and foreign exchange. To borrow a term from one of the witnesses earlier in this week, Department of Finance, they called this 4th category outside the regulatory perimeter. And this area is also outside of the reach of the CPA's rule set and includes mainly the closed-loop schemes or the private networks. And this final group, as I say, have very little to do with the CPA. And they could range, the closed loop could range from stored value cards to e-wallets to person-to-person payments such as Bitcoin. Our only relationship to this group would be the payments that are being made from the bank account to buy into these products or to cash out and move the monies back. So think about it for the moment. If I were to go to Future Shop and buy an iTunes card, the purchase of the iTunes card of $50 would actually go through the CPA. But what happens within iTunes as I download the music and pay iTunes is completely outside our jurisdiction and happens totally within the iTunes network. So let me talk a bit for a moment. There seems to be some confusion as to what Bitcoin actually is, and is it a currency? We at the CPA share the same opinion that was shared with you earlier this week by the Department of Finance and the Bank of Canada. Bitcoin does not meet the tests of what constitutes a currency. And in our view, it's deficient as a medium of exchange, a unit of account, and a store of value. So if Bitcoin is not a currency, is it a payment system? But like any payment system, Bitcoin does have rules, does have processes, and does have participants. So structurally, Bitcoin emulates payment system. However, when we at the CPA talk about payment systems, we go beyond that. We talk about the overarching principles that should also be kept in mind. First, their safety and soundness. The National Clearing and Settlement System is there to facilitate transactions in Canadian dollars, which are backstopped by the Bank of Canada. It would not be appropriate to enter a commodity into this environment. At present, settlement of payments made through our retail systems settle next day. So despite the fact that they settle next day, receivers of those funds generally are granted provisional credit by the financial institutions. Why? It's because the system is built on mutual trust, confidence, and a robust legal and regulatory framework. The counterparties in the payment system have absolute confidence that at the end of the day, settlement will occur. And if the underlying funds are subject to extreme volatility, participants may not be able to settle, or this may cause them to rethink the provisional credit that exists and the efficiencies that exist within the current system. So let's look at innovation. And I started my comment by saying innovation does take place in all aspects of the payment system today, and not just in that regulatory perimeter. And I think the witnesses a moment ago spoke of that as well. Thanks to the number of new rules in place by the Canadian Payments Association, Canadians are now able to use their smartphones to take a photo of their check, to make deposits of their check. And we also work very closely with our member institutions and scheme operators to facilitate the introduction of new debit-based tap-and-go products like Interac Flash.
But we have about another 5 minutes for your presentation, or we're not going to have time for questions.
Sure.
So if I could ask you to keep that in mind, please.
I will indeed. So Bitcoin's often viewed as a disruptive technology, but they were there to develop some of the innovative features of decentralized digital currencies, the authentication without using a third party. Those products, while disruptive, those products will ultimately move into more mainstream payment systems as we grow. And if I move on, let me talk for a moment about trends in payments to give you a sense about cryptocurrencies in the broader context. There are many trends in the payment system. To help the committee appreciate the total payment landscape, this table here actually breaks down the facts and figures of volume and value. I think everybody knows cash, although it's the #1 used product at 45% today, it only represents about 2% of the value. It's continuing to decline. Checks are on the decline. But products like debit and credit continue to grow, largely fueled by the internet or the online payment services. But in the emerging payments, the growth of e-wallets also is showing tremendous growth at about 40% per annum. But these numbers are very deceiving because the actual volumes are so small. Canadian data on cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin is very difficult. So what we've had to do is extrapolate from global data, and we estimate that there's approximately 1,000 to 2,000 Bitcoin transactions happening on an average day. This represents about 1/100th% of the total volume of transactions in the country today. So as previously noted, cryptocurrencies do not rely on the clearing and settlement system, and therefore do not benefit from the legal framework set out by the CPA or supporting legislation. That said, these entities are not eligible for CPA membership. Current members of the CPA must be regulated financial institutions. They must have appropriate oversight, and they must have access to emergency liquidity through the Bank of Canada, all of which are there to safeguard our national clearing and settlement system. So, in conclusion, it's important to learn about these digital currencies, gain some insights, but also understand the related risks of these products. And indeed, the committee study, combined with the ongoing study by the Department of Finance into the broader payment system, is an ideal opportunity to ensure that the public policy objectives underlying the Canadian payment system are respected. In this regard, we fully support the government's intention, as announced in the budget last February, to develop a risk-based approach to oversight of the Canadian payment system. As we discussed today, not every emerging payment, and certainly none of the cryptocurrencies, are covered by today's regulatory environment. So as we move forward and we think about these products, we must think about the risks associated with the products. Can they be mitigated? Do these organizations or digital currencies have a need yet undefined to access the clearing and settlement system? And do the private closed-loop payment systems, such as Bitcoin, what reach do the regulators have to address the broader public policy issues of user protection or system safety and stability? So with that, I'll conclude, Mr. Chair, and answer any questions you
Thank
have.
you very much, Mr. Krevicek. I have a number of senators with questions, starting with Senator Black, to be followed by Senator Massicat.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks very much, sir, for that presentation. That was very helpful. If I understand your organization correctly, you are a service organization who are funded and serve your existing members.
We provide two levels of responsibility. One is the development of the rules and standards for the clearing and settlement of payments, and so it's a policy role, and we have a secondary role of providing the infrastructure that clears and settles all of these payments each and every day.
I understand that, but I'm just trying to simplify all of
see.
that. You are not a government organization.
No, we are created by statute. We tend to call ourselves quasi-public, quasi-private. So our board of directors today is composed of mostly member financial institutions with appointees from the Minister of Finance, independents. All of our funding comes through our membership. There's no public funding, and that all of our governance structure is currently under review.
Very helpful. So that does underline that you are a service organization, and I say that in the most positive sense of the word. You are a service organization funded by your members.
We are.
Right. So if I am a Bitcoin provider or another digital currency provider, I cannot join your organization today.
Membership in the CPA is established by statute, which is the Minister of Finance's purview.
That's interesting.
So it actually says in there you have to be a regulated financial institution.
That's helpful.
Bank of Canada, all banks, trust and loan, et cetera, et cetera.
Very well. Let's presume that digital currencies at some level are here to stay, and we can continue to look for developments in that regard. Can you see a day when your organization would be expanded, amended to accommodate digital currencies?
I think the payment system continues to evolve on many fronts. I know that the Department of Finance is looking today at just this entire area of growth in we'll call it the unregulated sector, whether we're talking PayPal or Google or whomever.
Absolutely.
And so their needs do change. But until this point in time, those types of companies have never articulated a need to have access to the clearing and settlement system within Canada.
Let me ask you this then, and my last question, Mr. Chairman. Building on that, can you see a scenario where commerce, individuals, would simply determine they don't need your organization? Not personal.
No, not at all. I find it very difficult to believe that a national clearing and settlement system that transacts, in total, over $50 trillion annually would not be necessary. We are a tool by which...
But, sir, at some point, people who ran the post office would have advocated that the post office will always be necessary.
The CPA and the systems that we run, and Carol Ann can also speak to this, we are a tool to also affect monetary policy. We are so closely aligned with both the policy set out by the Bank of Canada and of the government of the day through the Minister of Finance. Carol Ann?
So I like to think I'm a fairly creative person. But what you're talking about, is it impossible? Perhaps not, but it would radically change the framework that we live in right now. And what I would point to in particular, when we talk about Bitcoin, it is largely targeting, what we've talked about here, is a need around retail payments. It is around those small value, person to person, perhaps cross-border. It's a lot of issues it attacks, which is really in that retail space, to the left-hand side. And that's useful and interesting. We can talk about that. But when you talk about the CPA, you have to then talk about the large value in the wholesale system. And that is one that, yes, I could see it evolving and changing, but the framework we have right now, where monetary policy is implemented through the LVTS, and this is where wholesale funds transfers between banks go. And all of our financial services in Canada, whether it is settlement of securities, whether it's settlement of derivatives or repo transactions, or whether it's foreign exchange transactions to fund banks, all ultimately must settle through a large value transfer system that meets international standards.
I can see that.
So that's the piece I think would be a little more creative.
And may never change.
And may never change.
I can see that, but I
Yeah.
can see on the commercial retail side change.
I think that's the place where there could be innovation.
Very helpful. Thanks very much. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Black. Senator Massicotte to be followed by Senator Belmar.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, both of you, being with us. It's very useful. I'm going to pursue us along the same line of questioning. Obviously, you exist only where there's a interbank or interfinancial institution transfer of money, because as you noted in your presentation, if CIBC or Royal Bank does something and use their services, and it's their credit card, debit card, you don't get involved. The transfers are made automatically in the bank. So I don't see why. I'm tentative. I don't see why you would get involved in a Bitcoin, because they don't need you. They don't. There's no relationship there. But having said that, you do note when you talk about your definition of a currency, the lack of stability or lack of certainty, that there is maybe the Canadian public would benefit from a bit more regulation there. Now, you're an expert on regulation, currency and money transfers. Maybe not within a payment system, but do you see value of putting some form of regulation, basically FinTrack or other forms of regulation on this digital currency to provide that certainty or that comfort level?
Well, I think many different jurisdictions have been looking at these types of products, and all with the lens of anti-money laundering as a starting point. Given the anonymity associated with the particular product, there are concerns that do arise. So I know that both in the United States and in Canada, those concerns have been articulated. So to answer your question, AML is of a concern. As was the panelists were talking a little bit earlier here today, it's about also having a framework for the users, a framework of understanding what it is that they are getting themselves involved with. Are there forms of recourse? Yes, it may be buyer beware, but are they being clearly disclosed?
So basically making sure the public is aware of what they're getting into. Relative to the fact it's anonymous, and therefore there's a lot of correspondence, and the U.S. Attorney General made a comment yesterday saying the same thing, that this could lead to a use of this digital currency for the sake of whitewashing or money laundering. But we're getting testimony, including somebody from Bank of Canada, said, no, there is a perception that this is anonymous, but it's not anonymous. There's actually a very visible chain, and if you go back to the party who transacted, you can find out who is the identity, who is the person behind that transfer. Now, what's the truth? We're saying, some people are saying no, some people are saying yes. You're the expert. What is it? Is it really anonymous? If you want to get to know who transaction, can you find out?
Well, I think my answer would be we're not the experts on Bitcoin themselves. As you pointed out at the onset, you don't know why they would have anything to do with us, and they don't. They don't clear and settle their items because it's all intra, like PayPal, is all within the PayPal family. So the workings and the operations within the Bitcoin are really not our forte, so I could not answer that question for you.
So you're probably asking yourself, what are you doing here?
So I'm going to come at it a slightly different way, because I agree with Doug, we're not the experts, but perhaps I can give you a question to pose to the other witnesses that come before you to try to get at this difference. Because when it comes to the payments, so you've already talked about it as a currency, a commodity, and a payments. It does these three different functions. So when you talk about regulation, you'll want to think about what are the market failures in each of those different areas, and then what are the impact of those that you would want to regulate for, because I believe very strongly you regulate proportionate to the risks. So often these conversations mix all three of those uses, and as you go through this process, it's useful to think about which market failure in each one and how you might want to regulate it. But when you come down to this know your client piece in the AML, because I don't know the answer, and I'm curious about it, and I think it comes down from these two different areas. For a bank as the gatekeeper, they have a requirement to know your client, and they have, in this current world, a mechanism to do so. They know the questions they ask, they know how to get that information. Whether or not a digital currency, and you have to be careful about the model because they're all different. Bitcoin is a specific kind of model, and each model will be different, and you have to ask that question. I think the question is what is the mechanism by which you can know your counterparty now, not your client, but your counterparty, and it's a slightly different mechanism to do so, and how complicated is it to know your counterparty in that model, and that might be where you're finding that difference between the two. It's not completely anonymous, there's a public ledger, but how does a bank actually know their counterparty. And that might be the question you might want to pose to kind of get to this difference between the two when you hear conflicting information, because I don't have the answer, and I've read your testimonies. But that might be the question that solves it.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Senator Bellemare, to be followed by Senator Ringuette.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Moi, j'ai
Thank you, Chair. I have a question about your presentation, especially with respect to the landscape of payment details in Canada. There's some very interesting data there that are surprising, and I would like you to tell me the difference between the notion of the value of payments and the volume of payments, just so that we can better understand. You can see here, for example, that the volume in cash payments is 45%, where it is as it's 2% if you're talking about the value of retail payments. Could you please explain that to me?
For most of us, we use cash to transact our small purchases. We go to Starbucks, well, they're not so small, so we go to Tim Hortons and it's a little smaller. But we use cash quite frequently. And so the number of items or the number of purchases that actually take place in Canada over the year using cash is very high. So we're showing that of all the purchases that happen within Canada, 45% of them are still made in cash. And that's based on a diary study by the Bank of Canada. But because they're so small, they only represent 2% of the total spend in retail payments.
Okay. Total spent. Okay. As reported in the national accounts, the expenditure on consumption.
Well, we look at all. There was a survey, a Canadian survey on all payments, and so we have an approximation of how much all Canadian businesses, consumers, and government have spent in 2012.
Okay. And the volume is the number.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So there was a. Okay, it's not in dollar. It's the number of transaction. Right. Okay, that's much clearer. Thank you. That was my question.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Ringuette.
Thank you, Chair. Can we go to your slide 4? Okay. At the right of your slide, your list of credit card securities and so forth. And they do not go through your system.
No, they do. There's a slight difference. Think about the Visa and MasterCard today.
Oh, I think about them all the time.
I know. When you use your Visa and MasterCard product at a merchant, the processing happens all within Visa or MasterCard. Mm-hmm. They do all of the calculations throughout the day of which institution owes which institution. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, they calculate who is in a net owing position and who is in a net owed position. Mm-hmm. So, in a sense, they are doing all of the origination, the exchange, and the clearing piece. So then they come to the CPA and they make large value payments to settle out the obligations between the major owers and the major owed. So all they're using is our wholesale system to settle out those net obligations.
But they're not regulated by you.
No, they're not.
Exactly. So the credit cards are not regulated to the payment system. Now, if you go then to the left side, although credit cards are emitted in Canada, are issued by Canadian banks that are regulated by you. So they have a product, the Canadian banks that are regulated by you have a product that is not regulated by you. Then we go to e-wallets, electronic P2P, okay? V.me by Visa. That's also a product that is issued by financial institutions in Canada. And it is not at all within your regulatory framework.
Well, the ones on the dark blue on the far right, first of all, we don't regulate.
No, I know, but
the government regulates.
Yeah, but
and,
administered.
And we have members that utilize our systems. And the difference between what I would call the gray and the dark blue is the gray depend on all of our detailed rules around how to create a pre-authorized debit, how to make a direct deposit. Those rely on all of our rules and clear and settle through our retail systems. The ones on the right only use us as effectively the settlement agent to settle out the obligations
Yeah.
within their schemes.
Yeah.
And the ones on the far left do not need us at all.
Exactly.
And it's because everything is book entry. Everything happens within their own little ecosystem.
So it's the same comparison with Bitcoin. Everything happens within their ledger system. So
Absolutely. The Bitcoin is up under the virtual currency here.
okay. So I'm trying to analyze the fact that the Bitcoin industry is asking for regulation. The Bankers Association are in front of us this morning asking for them to be regulated and through foreign currency, which would put them. Where would that put them into your system? Because you do have foreign exchange in your
Okay, so
scenario
there's different
here.
types of regulation, obviously. There's regulation as a prudential regulator to ensure the health and safety of the entity. There's regulation on
Yeah, I
the
know.
services. So we don't regulate. The question about what comes in with CPA is there an exchange of value that's required that needs clearing and settlement?
No.
And in Bitcoin's case, there is none.
None.
No.
None. And they satisfy. So what Bitcoin is saying to us that regulating through the same process as regulation we have in place for foreign currency would be adequate, and as in regards to credit card and the VMe by Visa, it would be on the same standard. You would not be involved into the process at all.
No, we would not.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That concludes, Senator Belmar. I
A
apologize.
little last
quick
question.
one.
Yes. How many people work for you, actually?
The organization is approximately 90 staff members here in Ottawa.
90.
90, of which approximately 50% of those help support the actual physical systems for the clearing and settlement of payments in the country.
Oh, I thought it was bigger. Interesting. You're
Well,
quite effective.
We have a lot of strategic alliances.
That's right. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Belmar. That concludes our questions. On behalf of the members of the Senate Banking Committee, I'd like to express our appreciation to our witnesses. And we again thank you for your appearance today. I remind the members of the committee that we have a brief in-camera meeting to follow. We will suspend for 2 minutes. Thank you.